That was kind of a contentious product release.
When I joined the acoustics team in 2016, we sort of had a remit to reimagine the entire line of acoustic guitars for Fender. I mean, you're totally right. Like, these types of hybrid guitars, historically have not sold very well. They're often perceived as sort of a compromise, not electric enough, not acoustic enough, and somewhere woefully, in the middle of those two worlds. We were hyper conscious of that, obviously. The more we can acquire a customer through hardware, the more opportunity we have to sell them software. And so there are some levers that we can pull strategically to optimize that. It's not always about the gross margin dollars that we might make on a single piece of hardware. It's more about the lifetime value that we would see from that customer if we can bring them into the ecosystem and continue to have a relationship with them for 5 or 10 years.
Rodrigo, thanks so much for taking the time to speak on this podcast and have this conversation today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Adam. I'm happy to be here and eager to chat.
Your background, from what I've seen, is you come from a product management background. Of course, you were working on the Fender acoustic and accessories line, moving to a senior PM position at Beats, which is obviously an Apple company, I think from 2014, 15-ish. And then, more recently in the last couple of years, moved into this director of product management role at Universal Audio on the hardware products specifically. So do you want to just elaborate a bit on your background and that journey a bit more than I did in terms of the top level highlights and what you're passionate about in product as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you definitely hit all the highlights, and you mentioned when Beats was acquired, which a lot of people maybe think was more recently than it was, actually more than 10 years ago, which is pretty
Yeah.
amazing. I've been a musician my whole life. I grew up in a musical household. My dad always worked in tech. He worked for Intel for many years and worked in sort of semiconductor and high tech aerospace materials, and so like technology and music were sort of like omnipresent themes, for me as a kid. I think a lot of that sort of innate sort of appreciation for tech and consumer products and building computers and tinkering and taking things apart was always just part of it. Was kind of in my DNA. I studied music in school, but I wasn't really sure, where to go after finishing college. I would say I never took music seriously enough to become like a career musician, either in the more sort of academic sense or even in the, in the sort of just, playing in bands sense. It was always something that I did for fun.
It resonates.
Um, yeah. So, I think like in my early 20s, like I wasn't really sure, where I might end up. And I got a job working at my local Guitar Center store, actually, while I was still finishing my degree. And I realized pretty quickly, like, these are the kind of people that I want to be around, and these are the kind of products that that I'm passionate about, and that I want to learn about. I eventually wound up, as an assistant manager for the home store, just a couple miles from where I grew up, and managed a team there, and ran the pro audio department, and had a chance to learn a lot about all different types of products and customers and workflows, and everything from live sound, DJ, and sort of like that was
Mm.
like sort of the heyday of like EDM, was really popular. A lot of people were sort of aspirational DJs and sort of electronic music producers. That was a big theme. Studios, home producers, volunteers at church. I mean, the amount of different types of people that I got to interact with was always really stimulating for me. And so, I think that kind of set me up with a really nice, just sort of ground level understanding of the pro audio product landscape, the music product landscape, and the different types of customers that were in it. And so that, that kind of, I didn't know it at the time, but that sort of translated really nicely into a career in product management. So after Guitar Center, I started working for Fender as a product specialist initially. So I was, sort of a rep, and I did that for a couple of years, and then there was an opportunity for me to join the product management team, at a new product development office in Hollywood, California. And so I did that, and again at the time, I didn't really understand sort of product management as a discipline. I had an innate knowledge of the products and sort of how they, how to sell them, how to tech them, how to explain them to a customer at many different levels of competency or understanding, or or whatever. And so, yeah, I just I was fortunate to have some really great mentors at Fender. People who had been around music products for a long time, helped me build that skill set and really understand more about product development and the sort of full product life cycle. The supply chain side of things. working with engineers, working with go-to-market teams. I had never, something that I often share is like I was 26 when I first started working in an office. I had never had like a corporate job before. So, and since then, I've spoken with all kinds of young people that are either still like in an undergrad program or getting their first job, and it's like immediately in like an office environment in a big company. So for me, like adjusting from working in like a retail environment with 10 or 20 people to like working in an office with a couple of hundred people was like a
Hmm.
big adjustment. Um, so yeah, anyway, so that's just kind of a bit about how I got into product management. So I did that for a few years at Fender, and like you mentioned, like I was working in acoustic guitars, and I love guitars, I love acoustic guitars, but I always kind of had this hunger to get back into like a pro audio type of environment. So when I had the opportunity to go work for Beats, it was kind of I felt like it was kind of a transition in the right direction. Just in terms of being able to work on transducers and headphones and understand more about how those things sort of all come together. Much more complex product to build
Hmm.
than like say an acoustic guitar, for example. And then ultimately, yeah, Universal Audio. Been here about a year and a half now, and yeah, I couldn't be happier. Again, I just really appreciate the types of people that I get to interact with every single day. People like yourself that are passionate about music products and recording and audio production, and take that stuff really seriously. It's been a really cool journey. Yeah,
Awesome. I mean, just on the Fender years, guess were you working around the sort of time that the Acoustasonic line was around? I think when they launched that was like 2016-ish. That kind of
2019. Yeah, yeah.
were you involved in that line as well? Because I know that was kind of a contentious product release. It was an interesting one. So I don't know how much experience you had, with that line.
Yeah, so, I was fortunate enough to be part of that journey from the start.
Mm, right.
I joined just after we had hired on this guy, Brian Swerdfager, who was responsible for a lot of the most innovative guitars over at Taylor and had had a
Mm,
long history at Line 6 before that. And again, just, this guy was one of my core mentors over at Fender, a guy I really enjoyed spending time with. Very kind man,
mm,
just a super intelligent, creative thinker. So the Acoustasonic. I mean, I guess taking a step back, when I joined Fender, or when I joined the acoustics team, I should say, in 2016, we sort of had a remit to sort of reimagine the entire line of acoustic guitars for Fender. Fender's always done a pretty decent business in acoustic guitars. But I think what we had found as a company is that a lot of new guitar players tend to start on an acoustic guitar. Fender's obviously an electric guitar company, but
mhm,
a big part of our strategy was to sort of nurture the next generation of players and try to keep them engaged in the act of playing guitar, because we had we sort of found out through customer research that a lot of people, and this is no surprise, right? But a lot of people who pick up the guitar tend to put it down within the first year. A lot of
mhm,
people give up relatively quickly. And so we thought, okay, well, if a lot of these new players are coming in through acoustics, like what can we do as a brand to make acoustic guitar more fun and interesting for people that that see that as sort of their primary way into acoustic guitars. So over the course of the 3 years that I was with that team, we sort of started with the very sort of entry level, super affordable guitars that people kind of had begun to know Fender for. We had sort of tried as a brand to get into higher end acoustic guitars, and we kind of tried and failed multiple times. And so it was sort of a multi-step journey of starting with the very entry level and then incrementally starting to introduce more and more Fender IP and sort of Fender flavor, if you will, over time, and sort of building us up to this kind of pinnacle, which ended up being the Acoustasonic. And the first model that we introduced in 2019 was the Telecaster. That was sort of the overarching strategy in terms of that sort of being a controversial product. I mean, you're totally right. Like, these types of hybrid guitars, historically have not sold very well. And, they're often perceived as sort of a compromise, not electric enough, not acoustic enough, and somewhere woefully, in the middle of those two worlds. And so we were hyper conscious of that, obviously. The Acoustasonic name actually was something that had been in the Fender sort of trademark library for a number of years, and historically had represented, I would say, much more entry level products that were again sort of seen as a kind of a strange compromise. So what we wanted to do with this new Acoustasonic, A was to have, a made in California, made in USA story. And so we wanted to have a product that we could actually build and say proudly, okay, this is a, made in the USA type of product. We wanted a product that, at a distance could be immediately identifiable as a Fender. So it was really important for us to have, that iconic Tele headstock and a Tele body, and have something that really felt like a Fender guitar. But we also wanted something that could be played acoustically and sound good. Goal number one was to have something that, unplugged would sound right, and have enough projection and enough volume, to feel satisfying to play. So those were kind of, some of the overarching goals. We partnered with Fishman to sort of integrate some of their modeling tech. We developed some innovative new pickups with Tim Shaw, who, to this day is sort of the pickup guru over at Fender and developing a lot of pickups for the electric guitars. We had applied for some patents on some of the design aspects, the sound hole, most notably.
Mm.
So there was a lot of innovation that went into that instrument, and outside of sort of the technical aspect of things, I think there was a lot of real excitement, as we got closer to launching that product internally within the company, from the CEO all the way on down. It was a big push across the organization. We had a lot of support from our artist marketing team to get some really high profile, like, great players to
Mm.
play that guitar. And to this day, you see guys like Jack White playing it on stage. We did some really fun stuff with customs, and we were able to pioneer some actual, like, printing on the top of the guitar to do some interesting things with artwork. And anyway, so I'm kind of giving you all kinds of different things here, but there was just a ton of innovation that went into that guitar, and I think ultimately, it became a much bigger success than we even anticipated. And now they've got a line
Mm.
that, spans from, I think $500 all the way on up to, like, you know $2,000-3,000. So it's been really cool to see. Yeah.
I saw something the other day. I can't remember where it was I saw it, but they're breaking down the main target segments for Fender, and I think it was around about four. And it started with the beginner, the first time buyer, then the kind of enthusiast, and then the pro, and then the collector. And each of them had their own particular benefit. So the collector would be exclusiveness, that's what they're interested in, and the pros would be interested in reliability, enthusiasts, flexibility. And I think actually the Acoustasonic makes me think it's very much kind of geared for that enthusiast market. It's got the versatility, but then if it's a higher end model, then it's for the pros with that reliability element to it. And yeah, I quite like that breakdown and segmentation. I'm not sure if that was used when you were there or not, but yeah, I saw that and yeah, I thought of this.
Yeah, I'd love to know where you saw that, because that's highly privileged information.
Oh, really?
No, you're
Um,
totally right though, and
mm,
like, one thing that we learned is that, that performer segment, like people who really sort of live and breathe to perform on stage, was maybe a lot smaller than you might think. A lot
right.
of people are sort of content to play, in their bedroom, or, with their band, or their church group on the weekends, or just noodle around, with their family at home. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think, we had sort of, and this, you can really see this a lot more now that the product line has grown. But we did some limited edition, Acoustasonics that had really beautiful figured tops for that collector type of customer, the customer that really wants something that can
Mhm.
hang on their wall and show off. But yeah, I would say that, we wanted to build something that, had enough sort of tone tweakability that would really satisfy the recording guitarist that wanted to be able to get the sound of, 10 different acoustic guitars in one instrument that was sort of easy to play and easy to sort of, store, right? I mean,
Mm.
think about the amount of, real estate in your house that, like, 10 acoustic guitars in cases can take up. I mean, they're big. We definitely thought a lot about, like, how is this thing going to function in a live environment. It's really difficult to get a good sound out of an acoustic guitar on stage unless you have, high quality mics and a relatively controlled live sound environment. A lot of cheaper acoustic guitars have a piezo pickup that sits under the saddle that can be very tinny and bright sounding. Some players will invest in magnetic pickups, or, in internal contact microphones. Like, there's all these different kind of tricks that people will do or mod their guitars to make them sound better. So we thought, like, why don't we sort of put all of these things, let's make this thing sort of a Swiss Army knife, and we'll give the player an electric pickup, a magnetic, traditional magnetic pickup that can enable them to get sort of electric guitar tones. we'll put an actual microphone, a contact microphone inside the guitar to get more of that full body resonance, and then we'll put a piezo pickup under the saddle in the more traditional way, so that you can get that really bright, more bitey with the attack of the strings, which isn't maybe as well captured by the other two. I see a lot of people playing them live, and I think having that sort of combination of being able to sort of blend between different sounds to suit the environment that you're playing in is, I think, a really nice benefit of them as well.
Yeah, I mean, moving on to the Universal Audio side, and more recently, in our pre-call, we talked a bit about what you get up to on a day-to-day basis at Universal Audio, and introducing new ideas and validating them in terms of business cases. Obviously, managing a product team, and nurturing and coaching those product managers to become better product managers, and making sure that they're delivering on what you need in terms of the product side, in the hardware. So underlying all of that is product strategy, right at the very top, and making sure that you're doing the right things and have that strategy as a foundation. So maybe that's a good place to start. Product strategy is a word that's open to interpretation, and there are a million frameworks out there and approaches. So what is your approach for product strategy at Universal Audio?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think fortunately for us at UA, we have a pretty rich heritage of 20 plus years, and a lot of that sort of associated with Apollo and our plugins to sort of lean on. What's interesting about UA is that over the last, say, 5 years, maybe since just before the pandemic, our hardware portfolio has grown pretty dramatically. I mean, I guess just to answer your question directly, I don't think that there's any specific framework that we use. I think we're constantly sort of iterating on our understanding of the market, what our customers are asking us for. We're very fortunate as a brand to have a pretty great direct relationship with our users.
Mm,
And that's different than Fender or Beats, where you sort of ship a widget and you never really hear from that person again. Our users are telling us every single day, what they want, and what they wish they could have from UA. So we're always sort of analyzing that feedback. I think when it comes to sort of our bread and butter, audio interfaces and plugins, some point you start to hit a sort of a saturation point in sort of how many people are out there that are shopping for the types of products that we build, or at least I would say in the case of like Apollo, for example. In the last 5 years or so, we've really sort of branched out and started to proliferate into these different product areas. We've launched a more entry level line of interfaces, which is Volt. We've started to get into microphones. We've obviously launched a ton of guitar pedals over the last 5 years or so, and that's really sort of accelerated over time. Our heritage and our what makes us special as a brand, I think, really comes down to excellence in signal processing and in audio quality, and we're very much interested in extending that to the outer limits of where we think the brand can go. And so that's I think that's what's brought us to the current moment. That being said, I think we're also very much quite a small company in the grand scheme of things. We've also sort of spread ourselves, thinner and thinner as an organization, as we've kind of gone into all these different product areas.
mm,
And so now I think we're at a phase where we're selling software natively, and we're acquiring lots of new customers through software that we simply couldn't do sort of in the old business model. We're trying to figure out sort of how to balance all of these things effectively, and make sure that we are continuing to kind of retain and nurture the customers that have been with us for 10 or 20 years, while we're also going out there and acquiring new customers, and sort of trying to figure out how our brand identity of kind of this heritage and, like, sort of old
mm,
school analog based signal processing can sort of translate into the new world of more modern music production techniques, and reach a younger customer that maybe doesn't know what an 1176 is or why they should care about it. So I think it just requires a constant curiosity, and just a continual reanalysis of what's happening in the market, which is quite difficult to do in this industry, as compared to other industries. Um, and just making sure that we're continually staying close to what our customers are telling us, through product feedback, through surveys, through focus groups, through conversations with our sales team and people who are interfacing with customers and end users every single day.
Yeah, I mean, on the feedback side, I did go to the Universal Audio subreddit on Reddit, and I think I see someone at Universal Audio called Drew, pretty active
Yeah,
there. I think he's answering questions all the time, and I don't know if he's a conduit from the Reddit feedback to you guys at Universal Audio, but
yeah. Drew is our he's doing the firefighting every single day on Gearspace and on Reddit. Yeah, Drew's
yeah,
awesome. He's a professional audio engineer himself. So he understands all these different types of workflows, and
mm,
he's in the conversation with people every single day. And yeah, just highly technical guy, and we're lucky to have him out there, sort of representing the voice of the brand to our end users every single day. Shout out to Drew.
yeah. Just keep things on the strategy for a moment. I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that you guys seem to want to create this ecosystem in many ways. So, for example, the hardware links quite closely with very specific software components from Universal Audio as well, and in some senses, locking you into certain areas of that hardware and software connections too. It's a bit like Apple, I suppose. In some ways, there's benefits to be in their ecosystem and have their phone linked to the Mac, etc. So, how are you thinking about that ecosystem in your product development as well? Is that a really core part of the strategy, and really factoring that ecosystem into your decision making?
Yeah, it certainly is. And, like I said before, we've broken down some of what you might call the walled garden when we started selling software natively back in, I think, early 2023, just before I joined the company. There's still this probably, lingering or old perception of UA as being sort of a closed ecosystem brand. I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know. I mean, I certainly didn't know before I started interviewing for this job that UA had sort of broken open this, what had been this closed ecosystem for the longest time. And I think that the analogy to Apple is a good one. There's a lot of people that want to have that ease of use and that seamlessness between multiple products and see brand loyalty in that way. And there are some other people for whom that is kind of a turnoff. And I think if you look at some of the research, on Apple specifically versus a brand like Samsung, for example, a lot of people that buy Android phones or Samsung phones are like uh, self-identify as being like anti-Apple. There's like sort of a rebellious thing
Yeah,
to,
right.
to that. So I think from our side, we're not so myopic about the way that we approach that ecosystem. We want customers to have a great experience, with our software or with our hardware, regardless of whether they want to go on and purchase more. I think we're maybe a little bit more open than
Mhm.
Apple in that way. Like I said, there's only so many people out there that are in the market for an audio interface that's $1,000 or more, which is where Apollo sits. But we have all these amazing plugins, and we'd like to make them available to more people that may not have the budget
Mhm.
for our hardware, or maybe creating music in ways that are less dependent on an audio interface than maybe people have been historically. So that's kind of where we are today. We've got, I think, 50 or so plugins that you can get in our subscription, or that you can buy perpetually, that are all available native. And I think that's been a huge benefit for the market in general. And we continue to see, like, Apollo is still very, very healthy, and we haven't taken anything away from our Apollo business or from our DSP hardware business by making our software products available natively. It's been generally additive, which is really cool. And yeah, we want our customers to feel drawn to software or hardware, regardless of where they come in, whether their first product is a guitar pedal or their first product is a plugin. We want to have places for those people to go within the brand.
So, how do you ensure that alignment then? You're the director of product management for hardware products. So, is it by having that hardware product group that kind of creates that alignment pretty seamlessly? What other devices do you have for making sure that you're consistent across the various devices that you're creating?
In terms of it, like ensuring alignment from within teams, or like from a technology, yeah.
I think alignment on, I mean, alignment obviously has so many branches to it, both in terms of product development, communication, marketing. Just my experience in an even smaller company, it's just so easy for you. to have a disconnected engineering team, product team, marketing team, sales team, speaking in different ways about the product, focusing on different things. So, um, how do you approach that at the director level?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Yeah, and I think that's sort of, that there's sort of some of that is always going to be there, and in terms of the disconnect, it can exist. I think all of the hardware business that we do is through the channel, right? Through resellers.
Mm,
Um, while the bulk of the software business that we do is direct. Um, so inherently in that business model are two separate teams that are thinking about two separate things, which is an interesting challenge to try to overcome. Right, we have a global sales team of a couple dozen people all across the world that are laser focused on selling hardware.
mm,
Um, and we have a team, probably equally as big or close to it, that's really focused on selling software to customers direct. Our business model historically has been, on the software side, we launch, four, five, six new plugins every single year, and we're sort of always feeding that, and especially like within the last, couple of years as we've gone native, there's this incredible appetite to continue to release new and new plugins, so that we can continue to give our customers new reasons to buy, new reasons to come back, new reasons to subscribe to our subscription. I would say maybe a little bit of a headwind on the hardware side, in order to get support for, updates or quality of life improvements or UX improvements or other hardware centric things that have implications on our software team.
mm,
The way that we go about building that alignment and buy-in is really by working, cross functionally with our counterparts on the go to market side. Fortunately, the way our teams are set up is, we have a VP of digital, digital marketing, who's focused on selling software and plugins, and then we have a VP of sales who again
mhm,
is focused on selling hardware. Those two guys are close to each other and sit on the same team. It's just a matter of continually meeting and discussing what the opportunities are and attempting to rank things, in order of sort of, what will give us the highest ROI and what's really going to drive revenue. The other interesting thing about our business that can be, it's really powerful, but it can be hard to quantify, is we acquire a customer through hardware, typically an audio interface, and then that customer is going to go on to buy software. We want to be able to sort of, nurture our customers regardless of how they come into UA. But that's typically the path, or at least it has been historically. We sell them an
mhm,
Apollo, we sell them a Volt. Now we're going to sell them some plugins. The more we can acquire a customer through hardware, the more opportunity we have to sell them software. And so there are some levers that we can pull strategically to optimize that. It's not always about the gross margin dollars that we might make on a single piece of hardware. It's more about the lifetime value that we would see from that customer if we can bring them into the ecosystem and continue to have a relationship with them for 5 or 10 years. So this is stuff that we're always, kind of evolving. Our strategy, our tactics. But it's an on, it's there's no easy answer to the question that you're
yeah,
asking. It's
sure.
always a matter of, sort of just, you know aligning with our counterparts on the go to market side and our counterparts on the finance side to really identify where are the biggest opportunities, where are we over or under indexed versus what we're seeing in the market, and how quickly we can react.
Yeah, it speaks to my own experience as well a bit when I got the Universal Audio Apollo Twin X, which is on my table right now. And I think it came with a few bundled plugins as part of that purchase. So that gave me that window into the plugin world. And obviously, inevitably, I've bought more plugins since then because I like the ones that came with the hardware. So I guess that's one tactic you guys are using.
We have, I don't know, 200 different plugins in the catalog. And we've started to sort of identify the purpose that each of those plugins might play in acquiring a customer, retaining a customer, sort of adding vibrancy, or who those products are ultimately for. And so I think, over the next few months, years, we're going to start to get, I think, even more strategic about what we bundle into an interface, or what types of products we might give away or use as a customer acquisition vehicle, versus the types of things that might be more aimed at sort of retaining or sort of increasing the lifetime value of a customer. I mean, we have, just last year, we launched a product called Verve analog machines, and we I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but
Hmm.
we made it available as a free plugin. It's really cool. It's sort of a like a tape and tube saturator plugin. It's really simple to use. There's only a couple of different controls. It has a very futuristic look to it. And it's really kind of aimed at like, acquiring a customer and giving them like a really easy to use but great
Mm.
sounding plugin that has a lot of stuff going on under the hood, versus something like Sound City Studios that we released in, late 2023, which is sort of an all-encompassing, sort of emulation of a full studio with a, complete with tape machines and microphones and insanely detailed capture of different rooms and different spaces within the studio,
Mm.
which is much more of your sort of like pro user, power user type of thing that, we would reserve for sort of later in the customer's journey. You'll see us, I think, get much more strategic about what goes where and how we can use different sorts of plugins to acquire somebody versus to sort of nurture them later in their journey. We're very lucky to have a new digital team at UA that's been spearheaded by Ethan Kaplan, who's also an
Mhm.
ex Fender guy and the guy behind Fender Play and Fender Tune and sort of Fender's big foray into digital products.
Mhm.
He really spearheaded that initiative at Fender. So now he's with us at UA, and he's really helping to do the same thing.
He's very active on LinkedIn as well, I think.
Yeah, he's
Really
he's
close
super
to him.
active on LinkedIn. He's been spent a couple years in venture capital, and he's very close to what's happening in music tech and AI. He's got great perspectives on those things. He's just a great dude.
Cool. Well, but before we get on to the new business case stuff that I'd like to break down a bit, I think it'd be useful to throw a few definitions in there for people who aren't super familiar with universal audio and maybe even this particular segment of music tech. So, I think native and console is probably a good place to start those two terms if you want to maybe just define those for the people who are less comfortable with them.
Sure. Yeah. So our console software is probably the single most used piece of software that we make. Console is essentially the host based mixer and controller for Apollo. So that'll let you do everything from, create a channel strip, load plugins, create a mix, routing, all of that stuff is actually handled within console. So that's essentially a host-based mixer that's directly talking to the hardware and enabling different types of routing or different types of signal processing on the hardware. If you hear me say something like embedded or a DSP, what I'm referring to is a plugin or a signal chain that's running inside of Apollo in low latency, which is one of the sort of key value propositions of Apollo is that you can actually run plugins and you can do that with super low latency using the DSP chips that are actually in the hardware. Which is different to native. So native, sort of in the sense that we're using the word as a plugin that's running directly on the host. So something that you can run inside any DAW or something that where
Mhm.
the signal processing is actually happening on your computer. Just to kind of add a little bit more context here, we have a huge library of plugins that can run on the DSP in Apollo, and the name of that platform is U82. For those who are maybe not familiar with sort of the branding of the platforms, we're in the process of porting, some number of those plugins over to run natively on the host on your computer. So right now there are many more plugins that you can run on an Apollo than you can run on your computer. But that's we're continually bringing more things from that U82 DSP library into the native world. And we actually also have a few plugins, in the last couple of years that we've built specifically for native that you cannot run on an Apollo.
Mm.
Things that are just simply too computationally intensive to run on the DSPs that we have in Apollo. So things like Sound City, for example, that's a super CPU hungry, power intensive plugin that you can only run on your computer. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the distinction.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just for that. I think, yeah, the new business cases then, what does that look like? Where does it start? Is it an idea that's in the back of your head? Is it customer feedback comes in that you need to explore that avenue and see what's next? What does that process kind of end to end look like for creating those new business cases?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends on whether or not it's a hard, if it's a net new piece of hardware or if it's sort of an ongoing software feature. So I think to give a couple of examples, we wanted to build, say, a new guitar pedal. we would start by sort of looking at the market where there might be some blank space for us to do something that we think is interesting. For example, like we've launched a lot of these sort of amp emulator pedals over the last couple of years. We've been super successful in that area of the market. Within the last couple of years, we've started to see maybe some more competition in that space, and so we'll sort of look for areas where we think we can do something
Hmm.
that's very unique and can kind of stand out. So a great example of this is the enigmatic pedal that we launched in fall of last year, which is essentially an emulation of a Dumble amp.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's lots of Fender amp pedals and Vox amp pedals and Marshall amp pedals, but we hadn't really seen anybody do like a real sort of end-to-end realistic emulation of a Dumble amp. And there's a lot of reasons why. I mean,
Mm.
these things are hard. These things are hard to come by. And so, building a business case for that product, you're sort of segmenting the market and then looking at, okay, how many of these types of pedals are out there, in this type of price range, and how many of those customers do we think would be interested in this particular flavor of amplifier. One thing that I think was surprising for some of us is that that the enigmatic pedal ended up being our best selling pedal of everything that we launched last year. We also launched a couple of high gain pedals around the same time. We launched an emulation of a 5150 and of a Mesa dual rectifier. So these
Hmm.
two like very coveted like high gain amps. And I think we had made the assumption that like heavy metal guys and people that are playing prog rock and people that want those high gain tones, those are the people that are already sort of forward thinking in the way that they're thinking about amplifiers and pedals. Like we'll probably do really really well with these high gain pedals.
Mm.
But what ended up being true was actually the enigmatic ended up sort of way outpacing those other two products, and I think the reason for that is because it's just it's really highly differentiated. Um, and like sort of the inverse of that is like the market for some of these high gain products is sort of maybe being well served by other those other products that are still in the space.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I would say that like we're definitely happy with the sales and the level of success that we saw with all three. But the enigmatic ended up being sort of a surprise for us in terms of how much of a runaway success that it was.
Yeah. I guess saving a couple $100,000 on a used Dumble amp as well.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
value prop.
Our sort of pedal product designer James Santiago has some. Yeah, he's a lifelong LA studio guy, and he has some great relationships with people that were
Mm.
willing to share some stuff with us.
Mm.
So
So, how do you factor the kind of the digital landscape? Then, obviously, there's a lot of modelers out there now: Quad Cortex, Helix, XFX, etc. What are you thinking about in terms of that digital multi effects kind of competitor side?
the way that we've sort of positioned ourselves, obviously is, we're not a full multi effects company,
Hmm.
obviously. So I think for people who sort of understand, our brand heritage and our approach to algorithm design and sound design, we're very serious about making the best quality emulations of a piece of hardware in the world. I mean, that's what we do really really well. Products like Quad Cortex or some of the Helix, the other sort of multi effects products that are out there, we continue to see those products doing really well. There's a huge portion of the market that's sort of migrating towards multi effects over time. The boutique like single effects market continues to also grow. And there's obviously a lot of competition in that space. We see ourselves, somewhere between those worlds, right? I mean, we're making digital products, but we're designing them in such a way that you can use them easily with your existing pedal board, or you can use them as a complement to a quad cortex type of product, or if you want to use them, simply as a DI essentially, so that you can get a great guitar tone straight into your interface. You can do that as well. So, I would say that, we don't see a product like Quad Cortex as a direct competitor. Maybe there's a future where, we start to move more in that direction of being able to do multiple types of amps and effects, in a single type of product. But for now, we're building, very much purpose built products that are, we believe, the best in the world in terms of the algorithm design and sort of the realness of how a tube amp actually responds with different
Mm.
speakers and in different rooms and different environments.
What is the kind of the journey you mentioned about finding that gap in the market? once you identified that gap, what's the next thing that happens? Are you talking to engineering and talking about feasibility side? What is that sort of next part of that product development process post finding that opportunity?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think, typically, like, sort of the gold standard approach would be that we would sort of build a business case, before we really go deep with engineering on feasibility. So again, if we're looking at what's happening in the market, we're looking at sort of what we've done historically, sort of doing a temperature check with our sales leads globally to understand, what they think the opportunity is for a given thing. If it's something that we have some level of familiarity with, or something that might leverage a piece of technology that we've already shipped in another product, we have some sense about what that thing might cost to make, and how long it might take. We can pretty quickly arrive at like a very high level, business model of what that development cost might look like, what the forecast for the next 3 or 5 years might look like, and sort of triangulate those things against each other to understand what the return on investment might be for that time period. The ideal way of doing it would be for product management to sort of come to engineering with that homework being done and saying, okay, we think that there's this opportunity that's worth consideration. Now let's sort of take the next step to go deep on, exactly, what the schedule might look like, what the sort of different, piece parts of that
Mm.
that product development process would be, and sort of get to that next level of detail. So we have a pretty detailed process internally of what we call gates, like a gate zero, a gate one, a gate
Hmm.
two,
Yeah.
where different aspects of that business case would sort of come to life. And by the time that we've gotten to what we call a gate two, we're basically agreeing this: we're going to build this thing. Here's the schedule. Here's when we're going to ship it, and that's really sort of kicks off like engineering in earnest on developing the product.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes the opposite can happen, where we might have, and I think this is more true on the software side if we're talking about sustaining, development or like ongoing maintenance for a platform like Apollo, for example. It's like we have a big backlog of requested features or bug fixes or UX improvements or any number of things. And we might actually have the engineering team or the engineering management team give us kind of an estimate on how much time or how much what the resource plan would be like to do those things. And then then sort of this kind of sort of inverts the relationship, right? Where engineering would come to product management and say, hey, here's a whole bunch of things that we think are important based on what we're seeing. Help us rank and prioritize these things based on the business value. If it's a major release or something that's expensive, something that's going to take a year or two, something that's going to cost a lot in terms of resources internally, it really should come from product management to say, here's the business case. Now let's do the validation and the technical feasibility. If there are smaller things, things that are again more, maybe more software centric, or sort of ongoing support for a product that we have in market, the opposite might be true, where we've actually
Mm.
done the sort of feasibility and resource analysis before product management can sort of put a business case, or the sales team can sort of put a revenue number on it. So both things can be true.
Mm. So you mentioned earlier around the success of the Dumble Amp emulator pedal and the, I guess, lesser success of the other pedals launched around the time for the higher gain, sort of 5150, etc. What other things have in your last couple of years at Universal Audio you've done which just haven't worked, or you can share as a good example of something that hasn't worked and you grew from that experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, in recent memory, some of the guitar pedals that we had launched in late 2023, we had a line of pedals that we launched that was sort of a down market line. And I think, what we found was it's really hard to compete with a brand like Boss or a brand like TC Electronic or some of these other, MXR, some of these brands that are really playing in that kind of 100 to 200 price range. It's just really, not only is it a hyper competitive market, and these brands have a lot of brand equity, and yeah, there's just a lot of relevance for those types of brands, for those with those types of products. Um, the other thing that I think we learned is that people really want, you know when somebody buys a UA product, what they really want is the best. And we've seen that like time and time again with Apollo, with our microphone line, with our guitar effects line. Um, People come to us, ready to spend, on high ticket items because they perceive that the UA brand has some premium value that maybe you're not going to find in products that are sort of down market. And so, this is a lesson I think that we're continuing to learn. Obviously, as you'd probably imagine, the market for any given product kind of expands dramatically in terms of units the further down market you go, right? So the market for audio interfaces between $1 and $500 is a lot bigger in terms of units than the
Sure.
market for audio interfaces over $1,000. Same is true of guitar pedals. There's a lot of business that's being done, around $150 in guitar pedals. It's just the way it is. But it's not. I don't think our brand has as much. It doesn't hold as much value in those some of those down market categories as maybe we would have believed. And so, I think that was a good lesson for us. And I think the fact that people are, willing to spend more to buy UA products, even within our own product line, is not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. I think that the takeaway for us is that we would rather compete in markets where our brand heritage, our IP, our sort of expertise in signal processing really can command a premium.
Mm.
And we're not going to be sort of chasing the low cost leaders on, and trying to hit like big unit volumes, like a brand like Boss, for example. It's just not our market.
Yeah. We're yeah, we're starting to run out of time, so I'd like to just bring things to a bit of an end, and I think a good place to stop is your advice to people in product who would like to progress in the music tech world, and based on your journey from being a PM to senior PM to a director of product management now, what's some great advice that you can share with people, potentially product managers or associate PMs, or people maybe wanting to transition into this particular area?
Yeah, I would say don't get too hung up on the technical side of building or sort of understanding these products from like an engineering perspective. I'd say do it as much as you can, and it's great to always be curious about how things work and how products are built. But I think it's much more important to have a connection to the outside world and to your customers and the sort of macro themes of why people make music, how people make music, the types of tools that creators are looking for and that people are willing to spend on. People ask me regularly, do you need to be an engineer to do this job? And my answer is always no. I think what's really great about a company like UA and companies in this industry in general is that you have a really great relationship. You're able to build a really great relationship with engineers that can teach you a lot about software architecture or industrial design or hardware development and electrical engineering. And like I learn things from those people every single day, and I love working with them, but I don't have that background at all. So don't feel as though you have to go out and become an engineer in order to become a product person. I actually think it's quite important to sort of act as sort of a counterbalance to
Mhm.
engineering teams by being able to bring the voice of the outside world in and help to help them prioritize their work and help the business make decisions that are grounded in external realities. So I think that's one piece of advice. I think the other thing that I would just encourage people to do is stay active on LinkedIn. And there's so much great content out there that I wish I would have known about, or maybe it didn't even exist when I was kind of finishing up my degree. The other thing that I would say is, like, I think the role of product management is tends to be or can be pretty loosely defined or quite amorphous depending on the company and depending on the industry or the leadership culture. It's important to have some passion for what you're doing. I believe if you want to be if you want to look for a career in product management, I think it's important to have that, like, stay curious and have some passion about what it is that you're building, so that you don't sort of
Yeah.
you don't become complacent. You need to always be sort of taking in and synthesizing information, um, and try to find a company that that values that discipline. There are some companies where product management is sort of the center of gravity in the organization, and there are some companies where it isn't. And I've definitely had to learn that lesson over my years of doing this work. And so, yeah, I think those would be, yeah, stay curious and can, try to read and learn as much as you can.
I've got a few quick fire questions if you fancy doing it just before we wrap up
Sure,
this podcast. So,
let's do it.
so your favorite Universal Audio product?
Oh man, I mean, it's got to be Apollo. I was never an Apollo user before working here, and now I don't think I could live without it.
Awesome. Your favorite non-Universal Audio music product generally?
Oh boy. You know what? You can't see it here. I'll you know what? I was gonna say, can I turn my laptop? It's the Roland VAD electronic drum kit. It's over here
Mm.
in the corner. You can't see it, but
I'll
I'm a
show something on the screen.
yeah, I'm a drummer. I've been a drummer most of my life, and recording drums was always really hard, and there's a lot of reasons why.
Mhm.
And one of my good friends over at Roland got me a nice discount on this VAD drum kit, and it's completely changed my life. In terms of practicing, recording, writing songs, being able to get great results really quickly. I'd have to hand it off to the Roland VAD.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
I see some guitars in the background as well. So, do you have a
yeah.
favorite guitar?
Oh man, you know what? Probably that blue Jazz Master over there. Um, that's a Sonic Youth signature Jazz Master that I acquired some years ago, and like I got it for $900, and now those guitars sell for like $3,000 because they only made a few
Wow.
hundred of them. But I love Jazz Masters. I love offset weird guitars as you can see. But that's probably any jazz master is all right by me, but
Yeah.
that one's extra special because it has some interesting pickups and features.
Yeah, it's very nice. What's the favorite guitar amp?
Oh, favorite guitar amp, man. So yeah, I stumbled across this. It's kind of funny. As just as an aside, like I ended up buying a lot of while I was working at Fender, I ended up buying a lot of Fender gear, but a lot of it was not new gear. It was the gear that I found like on the secondhand market. So just as a random tidbit, I found this amp called the Fender Concert Reverb, which is the 2000s
Mm.
era like a blackface but sort of modern interpretation of a super reverb. I actually have bought two of them because I love it so much, just in case one ever died on me. Um, but that's my sort of amp of choice. It's 50 watts, but you can attenuate it down to 12 and a half watts. You can run it at quarter power. It's got a distortion channel, which is pretty unusual for that type of amplifier. It has the iconic look of a super reverb. It's a 410, so it's it's bulk. It's beefy enough on stage that it has the presence that you want. And I play loud music, so I like to have a big amplifier, but it's not quite as heavy or unwieldy as like a Marshall 412 cab or
Mm.
some big half stack type of thing.
Yeah.
So that's probably my favorite amp. Yeah,
Cool. Well, let's wrap up the final question. Favorite band and a band that you recommend people who may not be aware of it already.
that's so too. My
Yeah,
favorite
two
band.
favorite bands and a kind of maybe
Oh
an
boy.
underappreciated band that people should be aware of.
Okay, sure. That's a hard question. My favorite band. Oh man, there's a band from Detroit called Protomartyr that I like a lot. They're sort of a post-punk, very like intellectual and sort of experimental post-punk band from Detroit. So I would definitely, I'd probably say
Mm.
that Protomartyr is maybe my favorite band for a few years now. Another like close second and a band that I'd maybe recommend people check out if they haven't is a band called Drug Church. They I think are originally from New York. I think most of them live in Los Angeles now, and they're sort of a more of a like modern post-hardcore band, but they have like a good like tongue-in-cheek like sort of comical aspect to the lyrics that they write a lot of like social commentary and
Hmm.
really fun like just loud awesome like guitar riffs and just great production, really fun band.
I have some listening to do then, by the sounds of it, because I don't know either. So, Rodrigo, thanks so much for your time, and I'll leave links down below to your socials and probably a couple of links to those bands as well for people to check out. But
Cool.
yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam. Likewise. Yeah, this was really fun. I appreciate it.